Good evening. Vice President Jagdeo, members of the delegation of the Republic of Guyana, guests here from Houston and guests online from Houston and all over the globe, welcome to Rice University and this special event this evening. I'm David Lebron, President of the university. I want to thank you, Mr. Vice President, for your desire to be at Rice and at the Center for Energy Studies at the Baker Institute to share your views on this important and timely topic and from a very important country as this debate and conversation continues. Following President Biden's order on his first day in office, the United States rejoined the Paris Agreement effective February 19, 2021. This move made public our country's intention to take seriously the issues of climate change and its potentially dangerous impact on our future. The United States joins Guyana and 190 other countries in that agreement, acknowledging and understanding the very real threats posed by climate change. Our speaker this evening has worked for more than 30 years on these issues. He's advanced the cause of major social and economic reforms in his own country and made it a force in the environmental issues ahead, including the Paris Agreement. This all comes at a time of great opportunity and impact for Guyana, a country that has indeed made its way to the forefront of global energy markets recently with its oil field discoveries. Analysts predict that within a span of just a few years, Guyana will become the world's largest producer of oil per capita. At the same time as this evening's talk really makes manifest, Guyana is committed to developing a sustainable future for all of us. We are excited to host you this evening at the Baker Institute, which is ranked as the #1 in the world for university-based think tanks, and at the Center for Energy Studies, also ranked #1 in the world for the study of energy policy and energy geopolitical issues. The Center for Energy Studies at the Baker Institute exists at the intersection, as we like to say at the Baker Institute, of ideas and action, and we know you are here to speak about both of those as we work together to help solve some of the most complex issues facing humanity and countries around the world. The next speaker will be a member of our Center for Energy Studies, one of the leading voices on Latin American energy policy. Dr. Francisco Minaldi is the director of the Latin America Energy Program at the Center for Energy Studies and was formerly at Columbia University and the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. He is a leading scholar on the politics and economics of the oil industry and oil wealth management in Latin America and developing countries, and was instrumental in arranging the visit of this evening's speaker. I welcome, on behalf of Rice University and City of Houston, Mr. Vice President, thank you again so much for coming, and I'd like you to join me in welcoming to the stage Dr. Francisco Minaldi.
Thank you very much, President Lebron. It is my pleasure and an honor to welcome you today on behalf of the Center for Energy Studies at the Baker Institute. As President Lebron said, we are honored to have the Vice President of the Republic of Guyana today, who has had a very distinguished career, both as a technocrat and as a politician. He's an economist with a master's at the People's Friendship University of Russia. He started as an economist at the State Planning Secretariat of Guyana and later at the Ministry of Finance, where he rose to become the minister in 1995. He became the President of the Republic in 1999 when he was just 36 years old. So that's pretty impressive. And he governed until 2011. He was then leader of the parliamentary opposition between 2015 and 2020, and became the Vice President of Guyana under the President Irfan Ali's government in 2020. He has been one of the leading architects of the successful and remarkable economic performance that Guyana has had over the last few years and actually decades. And of course, you might have heard that Guyana had a growth rate of about 40% last year, while the rest of the world had a decline in GDP. And of course, in the region, we had a very tough situation. So that's pretty remarkable. Dr. Jagdeo also pioneered the low-carbon development strategy, which identified environmentally sustainable growth trajectory for Guyana, and led the groundbreaking partnership with the government of Norway for the purchase of 250 million of forest carbon through avoid deforestation. As you know, Guyana has massive forest resources, and in that sense is a country very well positioned for the times we are living in. He has had several leadership positions in the areas of sustainable development, green growth, and climate change. The UN Secretary General appointed him as a high-level advisory group of the climate change, and he has also been in the board of governors of the IMF and the World Bank. I also want to acknowledge other members of the high government delegation that we have today here joining us. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Hugh Hilton Todd, the Minister of Natural Resources, Honorable Bharrat, the Minister of Public Works, Deodat Indar, and the CEO of the Guyana Office for Investment, Peter Ramsarup. We are very happy to host at the Baker Institute delegations from different countries throughout the year. We often have between 40 and 50 delegations in a year from policymakers and industry people from different countries around the world. And so it is our privilege to host you here today. We are happy to engage in dialogue with different countries on the policy related to energy and climate change. So after Mr. Vice President's presentation, initial presentation, we will have a moderated discussion, and you are welcome to send your questions to the email that appears in that screen from time to time. And with that, I give you the floor, Mr. Vice President. Thank you very much for coming here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President LeBrun. Allow me to thank you for giving me this opportunity to share a few thoughts here and hopefully have an interactive discussion with the members of the audience. I just spoke at the OTC, and I spoke there about Guyana-specific issues. And so the big challenge has been, and the question locally and among many of our friends abroad, is whether we can become an oil producer and still maintain our environmental credentials and continue to advocate globally for a zero-carbon economy. And we believe the answer is yes. And I sought at that meeting to deal with how we in Guyana are doing so. Here, I wish to raise some broader issues, largely because I feel, from a developing country's perspective, we are not getting the same attention that the developed world gets, particularly in mainstream media in many of these countries. And there is a great deal of worry, in fact, stress in the developing world, that in spite of all the progress we're making towards a zero emissions future, that the issues that affect them and the help that was promised to them are not adequate, and the threat is becoming even more existential for them. So we all know about the IPCC reports. This is the 6th report that just came, the 6th synthesis report that just came out. And from the first report, almost 30 years ago, everyone understood, and the report, the scientists said that global warming is caused by human action. The last report just reinforced that it is anthropogenic action that is causing climate change. Yet we have delayed. We knew what the solution was 30 years ago, but the move forward to implement and to make the necessary commitments to address this problem has been delayed significantly because at the beginning, a lack of political will. And so now we're here, almost 30 years later, the sixth synthesis report, and we're already, it is said that to avoid catastrophic changes, we need to limit the emission rise to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial level. And we are already at 1.3 degree. So because of the delay, there's a greater urgency now, and the scale of the action is even more enormous. And the question is, will there be enough popular support? We know political will seems to have increased. With the election of President Biden here, there's been a flurry of activities and events, and the pledges have increased. And you have had the return of the US to the Paris Agreement has been a great momentum, has given a great momentum to COP26. So we know political will now across many countries exists, but is there enough popular will, and have people been briefed enough about the scale of action that is required now, and the disruption and the cost that to individuals that would be required to decarbonize the future? So the recently leaked report from the agreement next year, part of the synthesis report, says we have to peak emissions by 2024 and cut it by half by 2034 to achieve the target. Now, if China were to peak emission by 2030, the former Secretary of State, Kerry, said that the rest of the world would have to meet net zero emission by 2040, not 2050. And so what is required now is major action. May I get some water? Yeah. So this is very, very critical for all of us. And so the question too, another question is, would the pledges be irreversible? This is another question that is of concern to many countries, the private sector, and particularly the developing world. What if there is a change of administration, say in the United States again? Will the pledges that are currently made be reversed and therefore create another spiral of lack of will? And that is a major concern, because the signal, it has to be permanent. The policies taken have to be permanent, irreversible, for the massive scale action on both the part of the private sector to take place to decarbonize the world. I spoke earlier about what it will take for people. So in a 2018 level, I think the US emission was 20.4 ton per capita. By 2030, it has to get down to 12.1 based on current level of pledges. That's decarbonizing over 8 tons per capita in the United States of America. Now, that requires massive, massive changes in not just energy, but transport, and this is excluding land use and deforestation. Those targets are excluding land use and deforestation. But that requires massive changes in these areas, transport and energy. Now, are the actions, the policy actions, the support, the signals there for this massive transition? And I believe that globally, we have not seen enough being done in the areas that generate the most emission. So on the energy side, it is estimated by the IEA that by 2030, $1 trillion per annum would have to be spent in that sector to achieve the target of net zero emission by 2050. We're now at $150 billion per annum. So between now and 2030, we have to get up to $1 trillion per annum invested in renewable energy to meet that target. That's a big, big ask. And therefore, if we don't do that, then the global demand for energy will far outstrip the supply of renewable energy. And therefore, we'd have to continue building fossil fuel plants around the world. On the transport side, it's the same thing. We know about targets for addressing demand, but the targets are not deep enough to decarbonize the transport sector. So emissions-related target for vehicles, etc. Some countries have taken some steep cuts and are moving away from combustion engines, but many others are not. The third area that supplies the biggest, or is the source of the big emissions, the largest group of emission, is land use and forestry. About 16% of global emissions come from deforestation and land use change. And practically nothing has been done in that area, because we lose every year the size of Greece, forest the size of Greece. And there has been a total market failure in that area, because although it is one of the lowest cost abatement solutions, there is no market for forest carbon. And so we are willing to explore carbon capture and storage with costs upwards maybe of $250 per ton. And we're ignoring completely the forestry sector, where you can reduce emissions there for a fraction of that. And so if you look across the spectrum of all the sectors that supply the largest emissions or emit the most, then you will see in each of these sectors there is not enough pledge-wise nor enough financing, both from the private side and the public side, to achieve the decarbonization of these sectors required to achieve a net zero target. So what about the developing world? So the developing world has some major concerns. We have about a quarter of the world's countries that has a population of less than 1.5 million persons. A lot of these countries have very narrow economic structures. The economies are not diversified, like in the Caribbean countries, Pacific countries. If you look at the vulnerability index done by the World Bank and other sources, you will see that they're extremely vulnerable to climate change. A single event, a hurricane, would have a systemic impact, can wipe out 50 years of accumulated wealth. One event, 100% of GDP, or the equivalent of 100% of GDP, disappears. These countries are heavily burdened by debt, and they also are fiscally stressed. They don't have no fiscal space. to fund adaptation, and the adaptation funding globally is estimated now at this point in time at $150 billion. The world pledge since Copenhagen, $100 billion per annum. 75 billion has been delivered, but of the 75 billion, 50 billion is in loans. And therefore, adaptation alone in these countries would require $150 billion per annum. On the mitigation side, to decarbonize their energy sectors, they cannot fund the incremental costs of using renewable technology over fossil fuel. And there was a promise that the world will help them to fund the incremental costs because the newer technologies tend to be a bit more expensive. So they have budgets that are stressed. They have no capability to fund adaptation, and the world will have to adapt. It is already demonstrated that the concentration of greenhouse gases is such that some of the changes would be irreversible. And they have no means whatsoever to deal with that. And therefore, the quality of life in these countries, the threat is existential. They cannot deal with this issue. Now clearly, on the equity side, things have changed. So because there's been such a delay in climate action from the first IPCC report, the burden sharing has started to shift to the developing world too, because the Kyoto Protocol spoke about common and differentiated responsibility. The Annex 1 countries were supposed to take tough action, firm action. But over time, bit by bit, this principle has been eroded, and now we hear about equal burden sharing. So many of these countries have no capability for equal burden sharing. And so the justice, the fairness of this has also been eroded over time. And these countries were not historically the contributors to the current concentration of greenhouse gases, yet they suffer most from it. So that is why the developing world feels that sometimes enough is not done. We have the flurry of meetings, a lot of pledges, countries greenwashing targets to look good. They have no common basis because the base year is different for many. There is double counting. So in Europe, 2/3 of its renewable energy now come from burning biomass, which is pellet made from forests that are cut down. If they remove that, Europe has absolutely no chance of meeting its renewable energy targets. And so this is happening, and the countries are sitting on the sideline, and they will show up at COP, and then if there is not adequate financing at the next COP, they will see it as a failure. If the world doesn't commit in earnest, the developed world, to achieving these targets, many of these countries will leave as they enter the negotiations, skeptical as ever that enough is not being done. And so maybe I'm talking a little bit too long already. And then you should keep me going with the time. And so yes, and then whatever little financing has come our way so far, from the occasional pledges and often double counting and counting reclassification of the aid, and using loans now to replace what was supposed to be grant, when these pools of resources are made available, then the process of intermediation of these funds to the developing world is a nightmare. Through many organizations that are not fit for purpose, although some are created for the intermediation of climate funds like the GCF. The World Bank, the multilateral institutions are hopelessly incapable of understanding the challenges and intermediating climate funds. So you mentioned Norway. That was money earned from the sale of forest carbon for Norway. When we were building the model for the sale of forest carbon, we sat with Norway and we said, how can we raise the global attention? Because there were lots of issues raised as to whether forest carbon could be measured, would be permanent, can we respect indigenous people's rights, would we spend the money transparently? And these were questions raised, I think, not to do anything. So we set about building this model to do all of that. We set up a stakeholders meeting. We had all the indigenous organizations come to that stakeholders meeting, 4 of them in Guyana. And we invited the women, labor movement, the young people, the miners, forestry people, and the president chaired that meeting. That was to show that it could be inclusively done. 2, we set up an MRV system that would measure any change in forest carbon, so it could be measured. Thirdly, we said we can get an international organization to help to ensure transparency in the use of the funds. So we did that. That was 10 years ago. What happened? These agencies took our money that we earned, and then they tried to fit it into their old scheme of that they knew, loans or grants. So we have to even jump through even greater hoops now to get the money that we had already earned, when the sole purpose of the intermediation was to ensure transparency in the use of the money. So they're just not fit for purpose. You have to get, I'm not talking about frustration, but once I chaired a group that was, the Commonwealth Secretary General asked me to look at how we can speed up money to the developing countries. And in a Pacific country, I wouldn't mention the country, they said they had 10 technical staff, small countries, to fill up the forms required to access a 200,000 grant. It will take the time of all the technical people in the entire country for months to do that. So we said, and then you have 10 organizations coming in, descending, and then the bilaterals, and each have a different way of accessing funds. So we said, why not have a common template? Why not have a common template that everyone would use? And until now, we can't get it through for these small countries. So they need a revamping of the entire process of intermediating help. First, to scale it up to help people who want to tackle this problem in the developing world but don't have the capacity to, and then ensuring that the money is not wasted and it's intermediated properly. So what I wanted today was to say we need to look more at the developing countries. We need to look at they have, like in Guyana's case, can make a contribution to climate change too. Earlier today I spoke about our forests sequester more carbon emitted in Norway, Finland, and Sweden combined. We have a major contribution to make globally, but simply we believe that enough policy attention is not paid to these sectors. So when you open any newspaper in the United States, you would hardly hear about any of our concerns in the developing world. And I wanted us to have an interaction so we can draw more concerns to these countries, because the COP26 will not be a success if 40 or 50 countries don't sign on to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Yeah. We start getting some of the questions, but I have a few of my own. I wanted to ask you, you are a green policy, climate change pioneer, have been involved in this issue for a long time already. Guyana is a very interesting case because it's sort of at the crossroads of many of the climate issues, right? On the one hand, You have vast forest reserves in the
Sure.
country, and you have very low emissions, negative net emissions
Indeed.
for sure. But the country will also be potentially significantly affected by climate change, as many other countries. On the other hand, you are a low-income country that has the prospect of becoming a very wealthy country. And as President Lebron mentioned before, Guyana is forecasted to become the largest per capita oil producer on earth, surpassing Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, which is pretty amazing. I think if my calculations are correct, you have the highest production per capita ever any country has ever achieved. To give you an idea, Venezuela, which was the largest per capita producer in the region, reached a third of what you will reach in the 1950s when they reached the peak. So it's a pretty remarkable level of production. At the same time, you made this a massive discovery and have all this potential just when the energy transition is happening, and therefore you have sort of a window of opportunity to develop your resources. So what is your view on how to balance this sort of very legitimate right of Guyana to develop their wealth and the potential, and how to manage this in this limited window of opportunity that perhaps it can be made longer by efficiency, by lowering costs, by reducing emissions, but nevertheless, it's an ongoing process. So how is the country being able to manage that?
Sure. And your point about the worry in the developing world too, there's another worry, is that what it seems now that many countries are pushing them to maintain the per capita low emissions, but that could keep them in a low emission, low income trap for the future. So about 1 billion people in the world don't have access to power. So if they get trapped, many countries get trapped in the pledges that they will not grow emissions or grow the energy sector, then those people will never be able to emerge out of poverty and be able to achieve their legitimate right to prosperity. In Guyana's case, we believe that the oil and gas resources would have to be judiciously managed. It would require a lot of fiscal discipline and transparency. And that the resources must help us to do two things: to keep the economy diversified, the non-oil economy, so that the wealth created in this short period could continue to grow, because you be used to ensure that we create enough opportunities in other sectors of the economy, agriculture, the ICT, in tourism, etc., that can continue to generate wealth for the future for our people. So that's the first transition. Secondly, the resources now can help us to accelerate our supply of energy to people. We are now the cost of electricity is 30 cents per kilowatt hour, one of the highest in the regions. We need to get that down to half. We can't do that without doing some things. So our energy transition now is going to be a mixture of gas, hydro, and solar, and maybe some wind power too. That would replace all of the bunker C and the diesel that we're producing. So we can increase our national capacity, the installed capacity, fourfold, and yet do so about the same level of emission that we currently are producing at. And so these things we are carefully looking at it. Now, clearly the oil and gas industry will bring increased emissions, but the regulatory agencies and these companies would have to start looking at cutting-edge technology that are less polluting. And we've had that discussion with them already, and I know there is a serious effort to address this. Now, globally, we still believe that you must remove the subsidy from exploration and fossil fuel. We believe in a carbon price. So although we are a fossil fuel producer, we believe that you should move, that you need a proper carbon price to cause the massive transformation and the investments and the right signals globally. So I believe that we can achieve all of the objectives. And then our crude too is light sweet crude. It's cheaper, it's less polluting than crude that's produced anywhere in the world. If the demand remains constant globally, then we should be pushing out the high-cost producers and also the producers who are producing more heavy sour crude. And so that is how we're approaching it, the two hand in hand.
Thank you very much. One, following your point about how to manage the resource wealth, the question, of course, is how to avoid the fate that other countries have had in terms of the resource curse, right?
Yes.
The volatility of income. Generating difficulties. The fact that, of course, oil rents are poised to decline because of the energy transition. And so eventually it will not be as significant as they were. So how to guarantee that on the one hand, the citizens of Guyana benefit from the oil wealth. On the other hand, you create a sustainable development for the country for the period afterwards. And also take into account future generations like other countries have done. What do you see the role, for example, of a resource fund, wealth fund? What role for infrastructure investment in the country? And do you think there could be any role for cash transfer dividends to the citizens among the policies?
Yeah. So far, all of the resources from our share of profit oil and royalties has gone into a fund, and we have not used any of it. And every time we get a new like payment, it is announced, so people know in the whole country how much money is in the fund. And at the last meeting, I pointed out that because the experience of the world has been such where in many countries where the oil and gas industry is in, that they operate in an enclavic way, not heavily integrated with people, the country, where there is very little transparency surrounding their operations and the money that the state receives, that it's crucial that we find a different model in a country like Guyana. And therefore, we have made some commitments surrounding transparency, including criminalizing non-disclosure of money that we receive from oil companies. So if the Minister of Finance doesn't publish it in the official gazette and report to Parliament 3 months after we have any receipt into the fund, could go to jail for 10 years. We're working on legislation like that. That's the first thing. You people need to know. So at the end of the year, every citizen of the country can then go and get a copy of all the official gazettes and just add down, and that's the money we will collect it. We made a commitment that use of the money from the fund must be publicly known and debated in the National Assembly. And so projects funded should do that, and the project should do two things: develop our people, their capability, top quality health care, first world education for all of our people. We believe that's sustainable in the long run. And then also set up the basis for the infrastructure and other things for the other non-oil sector to keep growing, because we want to avoid the Dutch disease, change in relative prices, etc. Then the amount of money that we can use must be able, we have to absorb it in the economy without changing as I said before, the relative, the prices, because that would cause, you know, the appreciation of the exchange rate. So all of these are part of our equation. Fiscal discipline is crucial for the future. And we have demonstrated that as a party in government. When we took office in 1992, the country was devastated. Our debt was 900% of GDP. We were using 153% of revenue to service debt. When we left office in 2015, the debt was about 40% of GDP, and we were using 5% of revenue to service debt. Our per capita income had grown from $300 to about $6,000. We managed to tame inflation. We improved our balance of payment, the fiscal deficit. So we understand what it is in the bad times when we didn't have money, the necessity for strong management and ensuring people benefit. And so we want to bring that same discipline to the oil and gas industry, because that is required in the future. Transparency, fiscal discipline, preparing for the future, so when the oil goes, then you have other things to keep the country going. And then, of course, saving for intergenerational equity, part of this in the Sovereign Wealth Fund, to make sure that you save for intergenerational equity.
Thank you. Besides the issue of the management of the resource wealth, the other sort of pitfall that I have seen in our region, and of course in other countries around the world, is that countries sometimes don't develop the full potential of their hydrocarbon sector because of, you know, regulatory risks and, I mean, issues that relate to above ground risk, as the industry knows them. And we can see in the region, you know, Venezuela, Argentina, or Ecuador, countries with massive potential that have sort of wasted a lot of opportunities to develop their resources because of lack of credible and stable policies in the oil sector. It has been reported recently that Guyana is creating a petroleum commission, and I think that resembles a little bit, you know, what Brazil and Colombia, of course, have done before, regulatory agencies that have been successful in those countries attracting investment. So what can you tell us about that potential, that commission, the creation of that commission, and how can Guyana sort of avoid these issues that have been a recurring problem in the region? That of course you need strong institutions, you need good regulatory frameworks to have long-term policies.
Yeah, so just recently I spoke about that too. So the architecture for managing the sector is crucial, and it's evolving. And I was speaking about our capability now and building that capability and growing the architecture. So as part of that, we have to reform the legislation. So the Petroleum Act in Guyana was passed in 1986. Now we are busy working to ensure that we have a modern Petroleum Act. Secondly, we have had the Petroleum Commission. We hopefully by the end of this year, early next year, Parliament comes out of recess, we're going to go with legislation on the Petroleum Commission. The Sovereign Wealth Fund has to be improved. We have to make it more arm's length. We were critical of it when we were in opposition. It's not structured in a way where it keeps the politicians at arm's length from the management of the resources. That has to evolve into a model similar to the Norwegian model, not identical. We subscribe to the Santiago principles, you know, for transparency in the industry. So we are busy building the architecture. We're strengthening our environmental protection agency. All of this is done not to penalize the sector, but to ensure that we have predictable regimes, fiscal regimes through maybe a standard public PSA, production sharing agreement, because we have had some criticisms of that too, that Guyana did not get enough in the first one that we signed. So we made sure that we're going to improve that. But also from the safety, regulatory, environmental side, that the companies know what they can expect. And this is good because it helps them too for planning purposes, and it helps the country to safeguard its assets. So we're in the process of dealing with all of these. For a small country that is moving at the pace at which it's moving, it takes a bit of doing. So we have local people, but we're also importing some of the capability and the capacity to do this. We can't stop the growth of the industry to do this. Sure. We have to do it in tandem with the growth of the industry. And we're hoping that that regime will extend to almost all of the areas. Predictable engagements with the government that would allow us not just to deal with downstream, but also midstream and upstream in processes and investments in the sector. And there are a lot. We have some exciting plans about how we can use even, say, gas to do protein plant for our livestock industry, growing more corn, using the resources and soybean, because we believe food production would be vital in the future for a growing global population, and with the supply side shrinking. So we believe that regime will be in place not just for the industry, but for other areas. Permitting, for example, you mentioned about many companies have a nightmare in permitting processes. We're now working with a group with some help from abroad to document every single process in the country, particularly the business processes, where the government engages with people and investors, and documenting them first and seeing how we can improve them, cut out the bureaucracy, so that helps to get things moving faster.
Do you expect the Commission to be conducting bidding processes for in the future? Sure, but not necessarily the Commission, but we don't know whether the Commission will do it, but definitely in the past, all of the blocks that were given out were based on applications. In the early days, we didn't have anyone who wanted anything. I remember as president how tough it was to get people to just explore. Now everyone wants to get in there. So now that there's a demand for the sectors, we've made it clear that it would go through a public process, a bidding process. So I don't know who will conduct the bidding process, but it will be transparently done.
Great, thank you. One issue that you raised in your remarks is the issue of how to make politically viable climate policy. And you also mentioned the importance of having a carbon price or a carbon tax, or something that really creates the correct incentives to. I wonder what are if you have any sort of reflections, even in a country like the U.S. Our honorary chairman here, Secretary Baker, has made a proposal of creating a carbon tax and then distributing sort of the dividends, sort of a green dividend to the population. That's sort of one way to try to make it politically viable. Do you have any thoughts on how to make politically viable something that for maybe, I think now there is much more understanding, and of course the effects that we are seeing in climate are affecting, but sort of any thoughts?
I think it's actually, for years, for the last maybe 15 years or so, we were saying that the only way you would see the political will being developed if you had the popular will pushing it. And now you seem to have more political will because everyone believes that the changes are going to affect the planet and the way of life of people. So it's now to work at the popular will, but people already, because of these adverse events, the climate events like the flooding that we've recently seen, catastrophic flooding, the more frequent climate-related, weather-related events that now are increasingly being linked to climate change, that people, at least they understand the threat, But they need to now understand that there is a cost to the changes, especially in the developed world, that there is a cost to making changes. That is where it gets a bit tricky. And so because they would have to bear the cost. Now, what will happen is that if the costs are too enormous and people think in short-term political cycles, then the next, it would be good to campaign on that against climate change, because if somebody says we have to decarbonize transport, we're banning all SUVs, or there will be a tax on SUVs going forward, which is 10 times that of a vehicle that is using no small amount of energy, a fossil fuel, or it's totally renewable, then it's easy to campaign on that. And that is why there is this big worry about linking the popular will and reversibility things, because it's easy to win elections if people are not with you. And politicians think in cycles. They think in 5 years cycles. So that is a big worry. But the carbon tax could allow that. We support that, either the tax or a cap and trade system. How the proceeds are distributed, it's up to the countries. But we should not do it in a way that shifts the burden to the developing world. And that is why when we met together with this, that was a big sticking point. Christine Lagarde, myself, Larry Summers, and a few of the Prime Minister of Norway, when we had to come up, the UN Secretary General asked us to look at how we could put together $100 billion a year for climate issues. We came up with a lot of measures, including on the airline, shipping, etc. But the key thing was that principle of not shifting the burden to the developing world. But I'm sure you can find ways, for example, if the tax is a global tax and people are pushed towards that, they can find ways of mitigating that. So money levied in these countries, the taxes levied, can be kept in those countries for programs that would help to cushion the impact on people. But I'm a strong believer that you need a strong price signal to people. It's not going to happen through just pledges or people politicians urging the business community to do so. I see you getting lots of questions,
Yes.
so maybe I have to shorten my answers a bit.
Yeah, let me take some of the audience questions. Thank you very much. So one first question is how does Guyana plan to attract and retain investment in partnerships between national and foreign companies? How to stimulate sort of foreign...
In this sector particularly, it has to be shared prosperity. Our regimes are attractive. People can work in Guyana. We've spent three decades of reversing the impression that Guyana was an insular country that was uninterested in the rest of the world, to an open economy now with predictable regimes. We even have a constitutional guarantee for private capital. So foreign investors can know that when they come to Guyana, their investments would be protected. But in this sector, we want the local people to benefit. That's the only way it becomes sustainable. If the 800,000 of us can't benefit from the sector or the growth in the industry, like the oil and gas industry, then we would have failed as a government and as a people, because we haven't created the right model. This is all for our people. It can only be for the people of the country. So we encourage partnerships. That's been our motto now, pushing at the OTC. We have a lot of companies here from Guyana who are looking to partner with investors. We want this prosperity to be shared.
Great. One question here is about the role of the diaspora, of the Guyanese, people of Guyanese heritage, particularly even in the US.
Yes.
What will be their role in potentially investing back in Guyana, both in for-profit activities, but also helping in the
Sure.
NGO sector? How do you envision that?
So this is crucial for us. Our diaspora came about when we had the 3 decades of undemocratic rule. A lot of people fled the country. The period I told you, the starting point, when we were almost below Haiti. And therefore, that has grown because the pull effect is still strong. You are uniting the families. So we have a massive diaspora. And a lot of very, they've made a lot of progress globally. They're very industrious people, and they have a lot of skills. And we're hoping that they will come back now, that they will see this as part of their heritage too. And now a lot of people try to come back often to work for government. And I say to them, we don't have too many opportunities in government, high-paying opportunities. You have to come back and explore the new opportunities in the private sector that are opening up in every single area, in tourism, in hotels, in supply chain, logistics, transportation for the oil and gas industry, in every sector. So we encourage them to do so, to come back. The president has set up a new unit, in the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Todd, is here, and he manages a new unit in his ministry, the Diaspora unit, so we can engage with people and hopefully assist them with information. But they're Guyanese wherever they live, so they're welcome always at home, and we hope that they come back and explore all the opportunities.
Yeah, that's it's always, of course, a shame when there is a brain drain from a country, but studies have shown that the diasporas can be instrumental in helping countries.
Exactly. The expertise is enormous in many of the areas.
Yeah, so that's a great resource to tap in, and hopefully you can do it. A couple of questions are about sort of a little bit more about foreign policy connected to climate policy. So can you speak about the commitments on this climate issue made through the CARICOM regional body, and is there alignment in the decarbonization policies in countries in the region? And another question is more about what will be the role sort of Guyana in this new sort of era of sort of significant wealth in terms of their foreign policy in the region?
Yes. So we closely coordinate our position in CARICOM. But as you know, many of these countries are island states. We're a coastal state, but we still have major adaptation needs. So most of them are in the hurricane belt. So they get hit frequently and very hard by the weather-related events. And many of them exhibit the same features I spoke about earlier. The economy would depend either on tourism or the financial sector. The financial sector was devastated because of what happened, the harmful taxation arrangements, So in many of these countries, so very little diversification. COVID has hit now the tourism sector. So many of these countries are really, really having a hard time. So they don't have any money for adaptation. So adaptation is greater in these countries. The need for adaptation is greater than the mitigation. Although many are spending the equivalent of 25–30% of their gross domestic product on supply of electricity, because that's the cost of importing fossil fuel. Already 25–30% of GDP. Just imagine the US spends 5% of gross domestic product. So energy is crucial for them too. In Guyana's case, we are a little bit coastal, so flood, we are below sea level, so we have more to tackle flood-related issues. And then we have the forest, Guyana, Belize, Suriname, a part of CARICOM. So we have a means of also, if we put our forest carbon in the market, of earning and using some of the earnings to help to decarbonize the energy sector, spend some on adaptation, and to create green jobs, which we have laid out in our low carbon development strategy, and we're going to expand it. Next month, we're starting the consultation to add the maritime economy to it, because it had focused heavily on the forest economy. And so we coordinate our positions. But CARICOM is pretty strong and coordinated. And going into COP26, we've set up some things that we see that will be the barometers of success, whether we can achieve those things. So we do coordinate. No, I missed the second part.
Sort of the general, the foreign policy of Guyana in the new era of sort of being a wealthier country.
Wealthy, well, we don't see ourselves as wealthy as yet. The oil revenue at the magnitude that would see major flows to Guyana, it's not coming for the next few years. We still have to $300–400 million a year now. It's not a lot of money, and many people think, oh, the wealth will come tomorrow, or it's here today, and suddenly we have to start splurging. We have to live within our means for quite a while into the future. And but I don't think it will change our core values, because if you have more money, it would change your core values. We believe in a decarbonized world, a fairer world. We believe in democracy, because that has been a challenge. There are some principles that we believe in that we continue to pursue through our foreign policy. And hopefully, if we have more resources, we can make a greater contribution to regional integration through CARICOM.
Great. One question is about what is your vision for Guyana in the next 20 years towards 2040?
We just asked that, and we have a country, we're hoping in the next 10 years, we'd have a per capita GDP of $30,000. We'd have a diversified economy that is generating the non-oil economy, generating as much wealth as the oil economy, that we have our people, all of them have access to world-class education. They can be safe, they have security in their homes, they can enjoy leisure, they have good quality health care, all of our people, whether they live in the hinterland, the indigenous people, or those on the coast, that they all can benefit from the changes at home, and they live in a condition of freedom, democracy. That's what we're hoping for.
Great vision. Well, I was wondering on your previous comments on how to manage the expectations. It's one of the tough issues in a new producer of oil, how to manage the expectations of the population of how quickly they will benefit.
And that comes back to something I missed earlier about the cash transfers. You mentioned that. So a lot of people believe we have a lot of money to give. Like before the elections, one gentleman said that we must give every Guyanese family $5,000 per annum. So when you multiply 200,000 households, that's $1 billion per annum, and we're only collecting maybe 300 million. So, and people actually believed it. So sometimes, you know, for political purposes, people raise expectations. So that's why we have to constantly be out there talking to people. And then we have some others who would like us to leave the oil in the ground. And I made that point this morning about some people who are saying this. What they effectively want us to do is to maintain the monopoly of the existing producers. The $4 trillion economy must remain with the US and Saudi Arabia and the others. We must not get part of it, although we can do it cheaper. And we don't agree with that. We don't agree with that.
One question is, what will you recommend to other governments of small countries to prepare policies to address the lack of funding, the lack of capacity in this space? I guess it refers to prepare policies related to climate change and how to address the lack of funding and the lack of capacities in the countries.
So somebody needs to stop the World Bank and the GCF and the others giving tiny sums of money for readiness programs. They need to just listen, work on one document for each of these countries. We know our challenges now. We know what the needs of the countries are, and then try to fund projects at scale. We cannot be tinkering and doing we're giving a country $4 million to improve hydromet services. So we know we can predict tomorrow we're going to get a rainfall or something like that. We can Google that. We know when more rain is coming because there is enough being done there. We can buy that. I think in a way to avoid addressing the issue at scale, we have all of these so-called flurry of activities around preparation for the last 30 years. And we're now moving beyond preparation. Every time it's a new somebody funding, oh, you're preparing, we're doing a new study. We just need to fix in the small islands in the Caribbean, we need to fix the schools so we can build hurricane-proof schools. We need to fix the hospitals so we can build hurricane-proof hospitals. We need, in countries like ours, we need to find crops that can grow in the dry season, and also like rice that can withstand flooding. That's what we need. We don't need another set of studies. We need a couple of canals to take the water out from the backlands, and we need to build stronger sea defenses to keep the sea out. We don't need 50 studies to tell us that. We just need a design on the project and funding for it. And that is what this readiness activity has occupied the minds and the attention of the community, the funding community, and those who want to greenwash again that they're doing a lot on climate issues, addressing the concerns of these small countries. It's not happening. We're not addressing the issue at scale. We're not tackling the problem.
There are a couple of questions. You mentioned a little bit about this, but on the role of natural gas and renewables in the future of Guyana, and also on which sectors you envision in this diversified economy 20 years from now, which some of the sectors that will lead that charge of diversifying the country?
Yes, so the gas, we're going to hopefully tender all of this before the end of the year. We're hoping by 2024, some 250 megawatts of power will come in. And that would help us to generate enough stable electricity to also assist with light manufacturing, because a lot of people can't pay that, kills manufacturing, and many other business activities, small scale. This will be a boon to the small businesses in the country. So that is crucial for us. But more gas can come in on the pipeline. So we're hoping that some industries, like we're exploring the basalt fiber. Can we use our granite and the gas to do basalt fiber, which helps with concrete? You can mix it with the concrete, it makes concrete lighter, etc. So there are subsidiary industries surrounding the use of gas. Then a lot of the agriculture sector is crucial for us. We've always been a net food exporter in the region, Guyana and Belize. We're probably the only one now, a net food exporter. So we just want to maintain that and grow it. We have to move to more plantation type agri-business, because that's the only way we can probably compete globally. But we can do so without affecting the forest. We can do that in lands that are arable but not forested, so we don't have to deforest like some countries to open up more arable land, and we have fresh water. So it means investing in infrastructure and assisting these sectors to take off. Corn, soya, Brazil does it just on the border in the savannas. So that's a crucial area. Tourism is huge. ICT is another area. On the tourism side, I was saying earlier at the other meeting about our biodiversity. It's enormous in the forest and the ecosystem services there too. So it would be a major attraction for people, and we hope that that sector would contribute in the future to national well-being. ICT, Accenture did a study for us some years ago, and they pointed out that we're as competitive as India, Philippines, etc. in ICT sector. The only thing was the cost of bandwidth, and that was since I was president. Now the cost of bandwidth has fallen 10 times per meg. And so it is something we want to do a lot, because we have a lot of young people who may finish school, they don't want to go back to manual labor, but they can move on to those areas in the ICT sector and supplying services to the rest of the world. These are just some of the sectors we believe that we can work on for the future. And many of them are labor intensive. The thing with the oil and gas sector, although it's capital intensive, it's not going to absorb the labor that we have.
And we have one final question that I think is very important to reflect on. What is the biggest threat to Guyana's continued growth and prosperity, do you think?
Well, it's climate, to a large extent, climate change. It keeps wiping out. We had a flood in 2005, wiped out the equivalent of 60% of GDP. We just had one recently, and we haven't even done the assessment. ECLAC is helping us now, but it's major across the country, and it's systemic. That is climate events, weather-related events, is one of those issues. So that is the major one I see. Now there are other threats too. You know, Venezuela has had its eyes on our territory for a very long time, and had made this spurious claim. We're before the ICJ, and hopefully that would be resolved there. But thankfully, our border issues, we have peace in our borders. That would be that. If I have to list the issues, we have to be careful for transnational crime too. You know, drug trafficking. These things have a way of undermining people. We had issues with human smuggling. A lot of people were going through Haiti into Brazil through Guyana, being organized. We recently had to put a stop to that. So these are threats that are there constantly, that when you're in government you have to tackle all the time. But I think overall, I think we can mitigate those threats, you know, and ensure that our country keeps accumulating wealth, unlike some countries, and our history when for 3 decades we decumulated wealth.
Well, Mr. Vice President, it has been a very interesting presentation and discussion. I am very hopeful for your country. I can see that you are thinking about the important questions and have good answers for them. Of course, there are plenty of challenges, as you pointed out, but the future looks bright for Guyana, and I hope we can welcome you back in the future here to tell us a little bit about how things are going, and you know, reflect on your sort of advances in policy in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much. Excellent.